The Mafia boss's dead fiancée had a twin. A single mom appeared at the funeral and broke him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Ethan Romano stood in front of the grand, dark mahogany casket, his face a mask of solemnity. The room was filled with people, important figures from every corner of the city. A whisper of luxury hung in the air, from the sparkling chandeliers above to the expensive suits and dresses worn by the mourners. Ethan didn't notice any of it. His focus was entirely on the woman lying still before him, the woman who had once been his fiancée. Sofia Santini had been the love of his life, the woman who had promised to stand by him through all the chaos of the Mafia world. Now she was gone. Her death was a cruel twist of fate, leaving him in a haze of grief he couldn't seem to escape. His hands trembled as he reached out to touch the edge of the casket. For a moment, it felt as if she might wake up and smile at him again. But the cold, unyielding reality was there. She was gone. But as Ethan stood there, lost in his own sorrow, something unexpected happened. The doors to the church creaked open. Ethan didn't notice at first, until the soft shuffle of footsteps reached his ears. He turned, and that's when he saw her. A woman, standing just inside the door, her eyes scanning the room. She had a presence about her, an air of quiet mystery that immediately drew Ethan in. She wasn't like the others. There was something about her, something that felt like déjà vu. The woman moved forward, her long dark hair cascading down her back, and Ethan's breath hitched in his throat. She looked so much like Sofia, but she couldn't be. As she stepped closer, Ethan's gaze locked onto her face, and for the first time, he felt as if the world around him stopped moving. The woman was striking, with the same sharp features, the same green eyes that he had fallen in love with. But something was different. There was an edge to her, a sharpness that Sofia had never had. She wasn't here to mourn. She was here for something else, something Ethan couldn't yet understand. The woman's gaze met his, and for a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. He knew that look. It was the look of someone who had been through pain, someone who had secrets that were begging to be revealed. She walked past him, not acknowledging his presence, but not avoiding it either. As she approached the casket, her expression softened. It was then that Ethan realized the truth. She was Sofia's twin sister, the woman who had been absent from their lives all these years. Ava Santini. Ethan's heart raced. He had never heard Sofia mention a twin. He hadn't known that her family kept such a crucial part of her life hidden. He watched as Ava leaned over the casket, her fingers brushing against the cold surface of the wood. It was clear she was grieving, but the sadness in her eyes was laced with something darker, something more complex. Ethan wanted to approach her, to demand answers. But as he opened his mouth, the words caught in his throat. Ava's eyes flicked to him, and for a moment, she seemed to recognize something in him, something that made her pause. She turned away, her movements fluid and graceful, as if she belonged here more than anyone else in the room. Ethan's heart pounded. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew this woman was going to change everything. There was more to Sofia's death than he realized, and Ava was the key to unlocking the mystery. And whether he liked it or not, he was going to have to figure out who she really was, and what role she would play in his future. The room felt heavy, and the air seemed to press in on Ethan as he watched Ava stand by the casket. It was impossible to ignore the similarities between her and Sofia, yet the differences were impossible to miss as well. Ava's presence seemed to carry an unspoken tension, an energy that felt almost out of place in the solemn atmosphere of the funeral. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the woman before him wasn't just a stranger in the crowd. She was a link to the past, a key to unlocking secrets he never knew he had to uncover. His thoughts were interrupted as Ava turned away from the casket, her movements slow but purposeful. For a moment, their eyes met, and Ethan saw a flicker of recognition in her gaze. She didn't speak, but the silent understanding between them was almost palpable. Ava stepped away from the group of mourners and walked toward the back of the room, her every step graceful and deliberate. Ethan's mind raced. his emotions a whirlwind of confusion, grief, and curiosity. What was it that Ava knew? Why had she come to the funeral now, after all these years of being absent from Sophia's life? He hadn't even known she had a twin, let alone that the twin would appear here, at this moment. Ethan stood motionless for a long time, his gaze fixed on Ava's retreating figure. His body felt frozen, as if the weight of the situation had bound him in place. This was no ordinary funeral. Ava's appearance had shifted the dynamics entirely. Ethan couldn't focus on the ceremony or the well-wishing guests any longer. The funeral, the loss of Sophia, all of it felt secondary now. He had to know more about this woman, this twin sister who had been hidden from him for so long. Ava had secrets, he was certain of that. But what did they mean for him? And more importantly, what did they mean for the life he had been living before everything had changed? Ava had already reached the door, but Ethan couldn't stay in the church any longer. He needed answers, and for the first time in years, he knew he couldn't avoid the truth anymore. He left the hall in a blur of thoughts, his mind wrapped around the single question that echoed through him. Who was Ava, really? He caught up to her just as she was stepping into the crisp evening air. The wind bit at his skin as he approached her, but he didn't care about the cold. Ava? Ethan's voice was steady, but there was an edge of urgency. Ava paused, her shoulders tensing slightly, before turning to face him. The moment their eyes met, Ethan felt the weight of the question hanging between them. She didn't speak at first, just regarded him with those same piercing green eyes that reminded him so much of Sophia. Why now? Ethan asked quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Why did you come here? Ava took a deep breath, her gaze flickering to the ground before meeting his once again. I had to, she said simply. There was something in her tone that made Ethan's heart race, something raw, something he couldn't quite place. Ava was hiding something, but what was it? Ethan felt an overwhelming need to understand, to unravel the mystery of Sophia's death and what role Ava had played in it. But as she stood there, the city lights casting shadows on her face, Ethan knew that the answers wouldn't come easily. This was just the beginning of something far more complicated than he had ever imagined. He had crossed a line tonight, stepping into a world he hadn't been prepared for. And Ava, this woman who looked so much like Sophia, was now an inescapable part of that world. The night air was crisp as Ethan and Ava stood facing each other on the steps outside the church. The city felt distant, the hum of Manhattan fading into the background as the weight of the moment settled around them. Ava's expression was unreadable, her eyes glistening in the faint light. Ethan felt the tension between them, thick and suffocating, but he couldn't tear himself away. I never wanted any of this, Ava said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I never asked for this life. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if she was talking about her connection to him, the Mafia, or something deeper. All he knew was that everything about this situation felt wrong, and yet, he couldn't turn back. Then why come now? He asked, his voice steady but filled with an urgency that he hadn't expected to feel. Ava met his gaze, her expression softening just a fraction. Because I owe it to her, she said, a faint tremor in her voice. I owe it to Sophia to make things right. Ethan's mind raced. What do you mean, make things right? He demanded. What happened to Sophia? What do you know about her death? Ava's eyes flickered with something darker, something that hinted at a truth that was too much to bear. There are things you don't know, Ethan, she replied, her voice low. Things you never even imagined. Ethan's pulse quickened. He felt as if the ground beneath him was shifting. He had lived his life thinking he understood the world around him, especially his world, his Mafia empire, the people he trusted, the connections he'd built. But this was different. Ava wasn't just some random woman from the past. She was a key, a person who held answers he desperately needed. Tell me what happened, Ethan said, his tone insistent. Ava hesitated, her eyes darting around the empty street as if she was looking for something or someone. Then, in a barely audible voice, she spoke again. It wasn't an accident, Ethan. Sophia wasn't just caught in the crossfire. Ethan's heart stopped. His mind raced, but his words couldn't keep up. He had known there was something wrong with Sophia's death, something off, but he had never dared to voice it. Ava's next words were like a punch to the gut. Someone wanted her dead, and I think they wanted her dead because of you. The silence between them stretched, heavy and suffocating. Ethan's mind raced, but he couldn't make sense of what she had said. No, he replied, shaking his head. That's not possible. Sophia and we were. He trailed off, the weight of the accusation hanging in the air like smoke. Ava stepped closer, her gaze intense. You were the reason she died, Ethan, she said softly. And it's not just about her. It's about you too. And the empire you've built. You have no idea how deep this runs. Ethan felt the ground beneath him shift again, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and anger. I've spent my entire life building this empire. I've protected the people I love, he said, his voice cracking. And now you're telling me I've caused someone's death? Ava nodded slowly. Not just anyone's death, Ethan. The death of the woman who loved you more than anyone else ever could. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He felt the weight of her words, but there was a part of him, deep inside, that couldn't accept what she was saying. Why now? Why are you telling me this now? He asked, his voice strained. Ava's eyes softened, and for the briefest moment, Ethan saw something that reminded him of Sophia. Because you need to know the truth, and because I can't keep running from it anymore. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. The truth was here, standing in front of him, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he wanted to face it. Ava was right. He had built an empire, but it wasn't as secure as he had believed. And now, standing here in the darkness with Ava, the world he knew seemed to be crumbling around him. Ava was no longer a stranger. She was his link to a past he hadn't known he had to face. And whether he liked it or not, he knew this was just the beginning. The night was silent, save for the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Ethan stood there, his heart still racing from Ava's words. Everything felt different now. The truth that had been buried under layers of grief and fear was starting to come to light, and it was more than he could handle. He couldn't wrap his mind around it. How had he not seen this? How had he been so blind to the depth of the web that connected his life to Sophia's death? Ava was right. He had spent so many years building his empire, believing that power and loyalty would protect him from anything. But now, standing here with her, he realized just how fragile it all was. You don't know the half of it, Ava said, her voice soft but firm. This isn't just about her, or even about you. This goes deeper, Ethan. There are things happening that you don't even understand. Ethan's brow furrowed, his confusion growing with every word she spoke. What do you mean? He asked, his voice low. Ava looked around cautiously, making sure no one was listening. There are people involved in this that you don't want to get tangled with. People who don't care about your empire, your money, or your power. They care about control. They want to own everything, including you. Ethan took a step forward, his mind racing. And you think I don't know that? You think I've spent all these years in this world without understanding that there are people who will stop at nothing to take everything I've worked for? Ava met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mix of sympathy and something else he couldn't quite place. I'm not talking about the usual enemies, Ethan. This is bigger than that. And if you're not careful, if you don't wake up and see the bigger picture, you're going to lose everything. Not just your empire. Not just your life. You're going to lose the one thing that actually matters. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had always believed his empire was everything. He had built it from the ground up, and it had become his identity. But the way Ava spoke made him question everything he thought he knew. And what is that? He asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. Ava's expression softened, but there was still an edge to her voice. Your soul, Ethan. You're so focused on protecting your empire, on controlling everything around you, that you've lost sight of what truly matters. You've lost sight of the people who really care about you. And now, it's all slipping away. Ethan's mind reeled. He wanted to argue, to deny everything Ava was saying, but deep down, he knew she was right. He had spent years building walls around himself, around his heart, and now those walls were starting to crumble. I didn't ask for this, Ethan muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't ask for any of this. Ava stepped closer, her presence calming yet still commanding. None of us ask for the things that change our lives, she said softly. But we have to face them, Ethan. We can't run from the truth forever. Ethan felt the weight of her words settle on his chest, heavy and unrelenting. What do you want me to do? He asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Ava paused for a moment, as if choosing her next words carefully. I want you to wake up, Ethan. I want you to stop hiding behind your empire and face what's really happening. You can't protect yourself from this by just playing the game. It's time to change the rules. Ethan stood still, staring at her. He didn't know how to respond. All his life, he had been the one in control, the one calling the shots. But now, with Ava standing in front of him, telling him that everything he thought he knew was wrong, he felt lost. He had no idea where to go from here. Ava's voice broke through his thoughts. "I'm not asking you to do this alone," she said gently. "You don't have to face this on your own. But you have to start listening. You have to start trusting again." Ethan swallowed hard. The idea of trusting anyone again, especially after everything he had been through, seemed impossible. But something in Ava's words, something in the way she looked at him, made him feel like maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. "I'll try," he said, his voice low. "But I can't promise anything." Ava smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "That's all I'm asking for," she said quietly. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan felt the weight of his past lifting, just a little. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he was willing to face it. Together, they would figure out what happened to Sophia and whatever else was waiting in the shadows. The days following their conversation felt like a fog for Ethan. Everything had shifted in a way that he couldn't quite explain. Ava had left him with more questions than answers, and he found himself wandering through his days, lost in thought. The world around him seemed to move at a different pace, as if he were watching it all from the outside. Ava's words echoed in his mind, haunting him in the quiet moments. "You have to stop hiding behind your empire." It was easier said than done. Ethan had built his life on control, on the empire that he had created from nothing. It had been his fortress, his shield against the chaos of the world. But now, that fortress felt more like a prison. He had trusted Sophia, he had built everything for her. But now, she was gone. And Ava, she was the one who had stepped into the void left by Sophia's absence, forcing Ethan to confront the past he had buried. The next time he saw her, it was unexpected. He had been at one of his family's properties in the city, trying to clear his head, when she showed up at his door. He had been expecting a meeting with his associates, not Ava. But there she was, standing in the doorway, her presence filling the space between them. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice steady but tinged with an urgency that caught him off guard. Ethan stepped aside, allowing her in, but his mind raced. What now? What more could she possibly have to say? Ava walked in, her movements calm, but there was a tension in the air that was hard to ignore. "I've been thinking," she began, her eyes meeting his. "About everything. About Sophia. About you." Ethan didn't speak, his gaze fixed on her as he waited for her to continue. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said, her tone quiet. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. What could she possibly still be hiding? "What is it?" he asked, his voice tight. Ava took a deep breath before speaking again. "Sophia wasn't just involved with the people who wanted her dead. She was hiding something from you. Something important." Ethan's pulse quickened. This was the last thing he wanted to hear. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice now betraying his frustration. Ava hesitated before answering. "She was planning to leave you. She had her reasons, Ethan, and they weren't about the business. They were about you, about your relationship, about everything that happened between you two." Ethan felt as though the ground beneath him had shifted again. "Leave me," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Ava nodded slowly. Yes, she was planning to walk away from the Mafia. She was planning to start over. With someone else. The words hit Ethan like a wave, crashing over him, leaving him breathless. He couldn't process them, couldn't understand them. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" he asked, his voice sharp. Ava looked away, as if searching for the right words. "I wasn't sure if you were ready to hear it. But now I think you need to know. Because it changes everything." Ethan stood still, the weight of her words pressing down on him. Sophia, the woman he had loved, had been planning to leave him. She had been planning to walk away from everything he had worked for, everything they had built together. It was a thought he couldn't wrap his mind around. He had thought their love was enough to withstand anything, but now he wasn't so sure. Ava stepped closer, her eyes softening as she spoke again. "You need to understand, Ethan. It wasn't about you not being enough. It was about everything. The danger, the violence, the constant threat that comes with being involved in this world." Ethan's chest tightened. He had always known that being a part of the Mafia came with consequences, but hearing it like this, from Ava, felt different. "I didn't know," he whispered. Ava's voice softened, her gaze filled with something like pity. No one knew Ethan, not even her. For the first time since Sophia's death, Ethan felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just anger or confusion. It was a sense of loss, of finality. The woman he had loved, the woman who had been his everything, had been living in a world he hadn't known. A world that had slowly suffocated her, that had pushed her to the breaking point. And now, all of it, everything they had been, everything they had shared, was gone. Ava's words lingered in the air, and for the first time, Ethan wondered if he had ever truly known Sophia at all. The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken words and lingering emotions. Ethan's mind was a blur, the weight of Ava's revelations pressing on him with an intensity he wasn't prepared for. He had always believed that he had everything under control, that his empire, his world, was solid. But now, it felt like it was crumbling around him, piece by piece. He had built his life on the idea that power was everything, that loyalty, respect, and fear would keep him safe. But what had it all been for if it wasn't enough to hold on to the one person he had loved most? Ava's words echoed in his head. She was planning to leave you. Ethan felt a sharp pain in his chest, a pain that had nothing to do with the loss of Sophia's life. It was the realization that he had never truly known her. He had been so consumed with his own world, his own ambitions, that he hadn't seen the cracks forming in their relationship. I thought she was happy, he said quietly, more to himself than to Ava. I thought we were happy. Ava's gaze softened, but there was still a certain distance in her eyes, as though she knew things that Ethan didn't. She was happy, Ethan. She loved you. But she couldn't live like that anymore. Ethan nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling in. He had known Sophia, he thought. He had loved her, but what had that love been? Based on power, possession? He had given her everything, but in return, he had taken something from her too. He had taken her freedom, her chance to live a life that wasn't controlled by the Mafia. Ethan turned away, walking a few steps before stopping. He wasn't sure what to do with this new knowledge. His heart ached, but there was something else stirring inside him too. Anger, frustration, regret. It was all tangled up, and he didn't know how to untangle it. Ava's voice broke through his thoughts. You can't fix this alone, she said, her tone quiet but firm. Ethan turned back to face her, his eyes searching hers. What do you mean? He asked, his voice rough. Ava took a deep breath, as though gathering the courage to speak. You need help, Ethan. You need to stop pretending you have it all together. There are people out there who will take advantage of you, of everything you've built. And they won't hesitate to destroy you if you're not careful. Ethan's mind raced. He had always prided himself on his ability to handle everything, to protect those he cared about. But now, standing here with Ava, he realized how blind he had been to the true dangers around him. I've spent my whole life building this empire, he said, his voice tight with frustration. And now you're telling me it's all a lie? Ava shook her head. No, I'm not saying it's a lie. I'm saying you need to wake up. You've been living in a world of your own making, Ethan. And that world doesn't see you the way you think it does. Ethan clenched his fists, the anger rising in his chest. What do you want me to do? He demanded. Give it all up? Walk away from everything I've built. Ava's expression softened again, and for a moment, she looked almost like Sophia. I'm not asking you to give up everything, she said quietly. I'm asking you to see what really matters. To stop living in this world where power is the only thing that matters. Ethan stared at her, feeling torn. He had spent so many years building his empire, fighting for control, for respect. But now, standing here, he felt like he was losing everything he had worked for. The life he had built didn't feel like his own anymore. It felt like a cage. I don't know how to let go of this, he whispered. Ava stepped closer, her voice gentle but filled with conviction. You don't have to let go of everything, Ethan. But you have to start choosing what's important. Ethan stood still, the weight of her words settling heavily on his chest. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he might have a chance to find something real. Ava was right. He couldn't keep hiding behind his empire. The truth was staring him in the face, and if he wanted to move forward, he would have to face it head on. I'll try, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. But I don't know if I can change. Ava smiled faintly, her eyes softening. You don't have to do it alone, she said. I'm here. Ethan nodded slowly, a sense of something like hope flickering in his chest. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he was willing to try. Together, they would face the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. The days that followed were a blur for Ethan. Ava's words haunted him, echoing in his mind, playing over and over again like a broken record. He spent hours pacing through his office, his thoughts racing with the weight of everything he had learned. Each moment felt like it was pulling him deeper into a world he had never fully understood, a world that was now threatening to consume him. He had always believed that power and control were the keys to survival. He had built his empire on those principles, with little regard for the cost. But now, as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, he realized just how much he had lost along the way. Sophia's death, the secrets she had kept from him, and the truth about his own life were all crashing together, forming a storm that he couldn't escape. He sat at his desk, staring at the empty space in front of him, the silence pressing down on him like a weight he couldn't lift. His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Ava. *, we need to talk. It's time. *, the words felt like a challenge, a summons he couldn't ignore. Ethan knew he had no choice but to meet her, to face whatever she had to say next. He stood up, running a hand through his hair, his mind still reeling. The night was cold as he made his way to the meeting spot, a private building on the outskirts of the city, far from the eyes of anyone who might be watching. Ava was already there when he arrived, standing by the door, her expression unreadable. She didn't say anything at first, just gestured for him to follow her inside. The building was quiet, the only sound the soft echo of their footsteps as they walked down a long corridor. When they reached a small room at the end of the hall, Ava stopped and turned to face him. "You've been avoiding the truth, Ethan," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "But it's time to stop. It's time to face what's really going on." Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. "What are you talking about?" he asked, though he already knew. Ava's gaze hardened. "You've been living in a world of lies, Ethan. Your empire, your connections, your power, they've all been built on deception. You've been blind to the real danger." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, the anger rising within him. "I didn't build this empire on lies," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I built it on blood, on sacrifice. I didn't get here by being blind." Ava shook her head, her expression softening. "You're not understanding. The lies weren't just about the business. They were about Sophia, about everything you thought you knew." Ethan took a step forward, the tension in his body visible. "What did you know, Ava? What did Sophia know that she never told me?" Ava met his gaze, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "She knew that the people you trusted, the ones you thought had your back, were the ones who were planning to take you down. She knew that your empire was built on a foundation of betrayal, and she was trying to protect you from it." Ethan's mind raced as the words hit him like a ton of bricks. "You're telling me Sophia knew all of this?" Ava nodded slowly. "Yes, she knew, and she was going to do something about it. But someone else got to her first." Ethan's stomach churned. "Who?" he demanded. Ava's voice dropped to a whisper. "Viktor Petrov." The name sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Petrov was a name he had heard whispered in the darkest corners of the Mafia world, a name that signified power, danger, and the kind of ruthlessness that Ethan had always tried to avoid. "What do you mean, Petrov?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Ava took a deep breath. "Petrov is the one who's been orchestrating everything. He's been pulling the strings behind the scenes, using everyone, including you, to get what he wants. And now, he's going after you. He's going after everything." Ethan felt the ground beneath him shift, his heart pounding in his chest. "So what do I do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ava's eyes were steady as she looked at him. "You fight back. You have to take control, Ethan. You can't keep hiding behind your empire. You have to expose the truth and take down the people who've been using you." Ethan stood still, the weight of her words settling over him. He had always believed he was in control, that he was the one who held the power. But now, everything he thought he knew was crumbling. Petrov was the one pulling the strings, and Ethan had been nothing more than a pawn in a game he hadn't even realized he was playing. "I don't know if I can," he whispered, more to himself than to Ava. "You can," she said firmly. "But you have to trust me. You have to trust that there's more to this than what you've seen." Ethan looked at her, the uncertainty still swirling in his mind. But something else, something stronger, began to take root. He had always believed in power, but now, He realized that true power came from understanding the truth, from seeing the whole picture. And he wasn't going to stop until he had it all. Until he had the answers he needed. Until he took control of his life once again. The next few days were a whirlwind for Ethan. Every decision he made seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. The empire he had built was no longer just his. It was a part of something much bigger, something far darker than he had ever imagined. Petrov was the key, the hidden puppet master pulling the strings, and Ethan had to confront the truth. He had been a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. Ava's words replayed in his mind over and over. You have to take control, Ethan. You can't keep hiding behind your empire. The thought of losing everything he had worked for terrified him, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the true loss wasn't the empire. The true loss was his connection to everything real in his life. For so long, he had relied on power, control, and fear to maintain his position, but now those very things felt hollow. They didn't protect him, they only isolated him from the world around him. The world he had once ruled now seemed so fragile. It wasn't just about taking down Petrov anymore, knowing the truth and using that truth to shape the future. The next few weeks were filled with planning, strategy, and moving in silence. Ethan knew that the fight would be long and hard, but he was ready. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. He had to act. Every step he took felt like a new beginning. It wasn't just about bringing down Petrov. It was about reclaiming his life, his freedom, and his future. He wasn't going to let anyone control him anymore. Not even Petrov. One evening, as Ethan sat in his office, going over the final details of their plan, Ava appeared in the doorway. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching him. Are you ready? She asked, her voice calm but filled with the same urgency she had shown from the start. Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving the papers in front of him. I think I'm finally ready. Ava stepped into the room, her presence steady and reassuring. You're not alone in this, Ethan. We'll do this together. Ethan looked up at her, his heart pounding. For the first time in a long time, he felt something more than just fear or anger. He felt a sense of connection. Ava wasn't just a part of the plan. She was a part of him now, someone who understood the stakes and was willing to stand by his side. Together, they would bring Petrov down. Together, they would take back control. Ethan stood up from his desk, a sense of finality settling over him. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that room days ago. He was different now, stronger, and he was ready to face whatever came next. Let's get this done, he said, his voice low but filled with purpose. Ava gave him a small smile. We will. And with that, Ethan knew that the battle was only beginning, but for the first time, he felt ready to fight for the life he truly wanted. The life he had been too afraid to live before. The plan was set into motion, and Ethan felt the weight of every decision he had made pressing down on him. Ava had been by his side every step of the way, helping him navigate the world that had once been so familiar to him. Together, they had gathered the information they needed, made the connections, and prepared for the battle that was about to unfold. It was no longer about revenge or power. It was about reclaiming control over his own life. Ethan had spent so many years building an empire, but now, he realized, it was never the empire that defined him. It was the choices he made, the people he trusted, and the path he decided to walk. Every move they made now was calculated, and with each passing day, they got closer to exposing Petrov's plans. The quiet meetings in hidden corners, the long hours spent strategizing, all of it led them to this moment. Ethan knew that this wasn't going to be easy. Petrov had built a network of influence, and taking it down would require more than just strength. It would require cunning, patience, and precision. But Ethan was no longer the man he had been. He was no longer hiding behind his empire. He was ready to face the truth and take back what had been stolen from him. It was the night before the final move, and Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat in his office, staring out at the city lights, his thoughts a whirlwind of everything that had led him to this point. He thought about Sophia, about the life they had shared, and about the future he had imagined with her. But that future was gone now. He thought about Ava, and how she had become the one person he could trust. She had shown him a side of himself he hadn't known existed, a side that was willing to fight not just for power, but for something more. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was in control of his own destiny. The knock on the door broke his thoughts. Ava stepped in, her face serious, but there was a calmness about her that reassured him. "It's time," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. Ethan stood up slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. "Are you ready?" Ava asked, her voice steady. Ethan nodded. "Let's end this." They left the office together, their steps in sync, their minds focused on the task ahead. This was it, the moment that would change everything. As they made their way through the building, Ethan couldn't help but think back to all the moments that had led him here. All the choices he had made, the people he had trusted, and the mistakes he had made along the way. But now, none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was the future. As they entered the conference room, the tension in the air was palpable. The room was filled with people who had once been loyal to him, people who had supported him throughout the years. But now it was different. The lines had been drawn, and they all knew where they stood. Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the room. "We're here to end this," he said, his voice clear and unwavering. Petrov's reign ends tonight. The room was silent, all eyes on him. But Ethan didn't look away. He had made his choice. He was ready. The final pieces of the plan fell into place, and with each move, Ethan could feel the weight of everything lifting. He had spent so long trying to control everything around him, but now, he was learning to let go. Ava stood by his side, her presence a reminder that he wasn't alone. And together, they would face whatever came next. The hours passed in a blur, the plan unfolding just as they had hoped. Petrov's empire began to crumble, piece by piece. The world Ethan had once known was no longer the same. But for the first time, he could see a new future ahead of him, one where he wasn't bound by the past. When the dust finally settled, and the pieces of the puzzle were put together, Ethan stood tall, his eyes meeting Ava's. They had done it. They had taken back control. And in doing so, they had changed everything. Ethan wasn't the same man he had been when he first met Ava. He had faced the truth, and in doing so, he had freed himself from the chains of his past. The future was unknown, but for the first time in his life, he was ready to face it. Together, they had reclaimed their lives, and in that moment, Ethan knew that nothing could ever hold him back again.